Well, good afternoon. This is Robert Brown, and on behalf of the Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative, we're excited to have you join us for Session 2 of KVEC's 5th National Micro-Credential Summit. Our past summits have been highly successful due to the continued conversations among the states and organizations and the positive impact professionalized personal learning, which includes micro-credentials, has had on educators and student success. We've had continued conversations with many of you out there, and some of you are logging in. And so we'd like to find out who's on with us now. So if you wouldn't mind, drop into the chat, those of you who are logged in right now, and tell us where you're from so that we can see. Oh, we've got some local KVEC counties here.
It's great to see our districts, Owsley and Lawrence. It's great.
EKU. Hello, Missick, our friends in Iowa. Hello, Ann.
Hello, Bob.
Hello, Sue. Hello, KVEC folks. Hello, Melissa. New America.
Hello.
So as folks continue to drop in where they are, we will acknowledge you. But one of the reasons we want to do this, a lot of this work is based on partnerships. And so last week we were talking about the innovation and the partnerships and possibilities. So to continue that conversation, I just want to drop into you how these conversations have evolved and who has been part of these. With KVEC, we do have what's called a Digitalacha, which is digital and Appalachia combined, Digitalacha podcast. So we've had, for example, Ann Kaufman from the National Education Association, Sue Beers, and as part of MISIC has been on our podcast. RJ Rodriguez from the Hawaii Teacher Standards Board has been part of that. Kareem Farah of Modern Classroom Project. We've also had conversations from the American Association of Colleges of Teacher Education with Jacqueline Rodriguez. But we've also had many other partners in addition to the folks who have worked with our podcast who have presented for us. Of course, that includes some of our partners that we work with closely with Digital Promise, Odia Young, Christina Luke, and those group. We've also had partnership with Bloomboard. I know Jason Lang and some of his folks have presented for us. Of course, we missed MISIC with Sue Beers and Ann Bartelt. Skills Force, we've had conversations with them. Conversations and presentations with Brock Yilmaz with Harmony Public Schools out of Texas. Robert Hagerman with the West Virginia Department of Education. Sonia Yilmaz and Brandy Bixler, also at NEA. We've had conversations and presentations from the Friday Institute with North Carolina University with Marianne Wolf and Lauren Ackery. Lisa Thompson and Matt Dunleavy of Radford University. Sandra Hurst with the Arkansas Department of Education. We've had folks from other co-ops within our state, from OVEC with Molly Sullivan, Letitia Sparks from KEDC, and then other national organizations have been part of our conversation and our presentations with the Council of Chief State School Officers, CCSSO, the U.S. Department of Education, the National Association of State Directors of Teacher Education, NASDAQ, CTQ with Barnett Berry. And I bring all that out just to say how large this conversation is across our states. Now, if there are some of you that are logging on that you know you presented for us, and I may have skipped your name, say, hey, Robert, don't forget about me. We'll be happy to give you a call out as well, because we really want to include and focus on partnerships and possibilities and how large this conversation is. So last week during our session 1, we had nearly 30 states and or state and national organizations who were part of that session. And as well as we were very excited to see how many classroom teachers and district administrators were part of that work. So because all the work that we do means nothing unless it gets in the hand of the teachers to improve the lives of our students. So that's why we're excited to see the teachers, and that's why this national conversation is so important to all of us. So again, we also have resources from the past summits. Like I said, this is our 5th one. We've had 4 others. 3 of those have been face-to-face. This is our 2nd virtual. And we'll be dropping into the chat box shortly podcasts from many of the folks that with whom we've had those conversations, and we'll put those in if you want to look at those later. We're also going to put in some links to some sessions of the past Micro-Credential summits, so you can see the growing partnerships and the conversations. And many of those includes, when you go to that page, you'll see others as well. There were interviews with many of the folks who attended and participated who've talked about not just micro-credentialing, but on competency-based professional learning and the importance of a learning system and the effect on teacher recruitment, teacher attainment, and then student success. So that is all very exciting and important to us. So Jennifer Carroll, who is our leader and our guru of Micro-Credential development here, and she also had done her research around micro-development, or it is on with us today. And if someone could mute their mic, I'm getting some background. But anyway, she'll be talking with us, going over some general information and putting in more chats as well. So we have with us our esteemed panel of presenters, and we're excited to have them here. This has been a great journey for us in speaking with these folks. Sometimes I had too much time with them because it was like we were sitting in the room with them. It'd probably be dangerous if I were working in their office. They may put me in timeout. But anyway, we have Bobette Ray, the Educator Support Advisor for Micro-Credential and Career Continuum. Sandy Shepard, who's the lead reading specialist for Student Excellence. Jeff Parks, the Trade and Industry Program Advisor. Kim Wright, who's the Educator Support and Development Advisor. Daniel Muhlenberg, who's a Trade and Industry Program Coordinator. Sandra Lamberson, who can't be with us today, but was paramount in the conversations that led us up today, who's the State Science Specialist. Becky McGovern, who's a Transformation Coordinator, and Vicki Jennings, the Educational Investigator. And as you looked at those, heard those names and the titles, notice this was a cross-agency initiative of working with them. So this was exciting to hear us, the kind of collaboration and conversations that they're going to have within their own Arkansas Department of Education. They're not new to working with micro-credentials. They've been working with Blue Board, but in this partnership with KVEC, other than Sandra presenting for us, this is a new partnership for us. And so we're excited to have them on here today. So Jennifer, I'm gonna turn this over to you to talk about where we're going to go do next and where we started.
All right. Thank you, Robert. It's so good to see everybody. Lots of familiar faces, and it's happy to have all these folks together on one session. And as Sue brought our attention back to that, we're really thinking about how we utilize professional learning to not only increase educator professional practice, but also to get it right at that sweet spot that's also advancing student outcomes. So I'm glad she posted that there to remind us of who we are all here for today. Just some housekeeping things. Those of you who were on with us last time, you'll remember some of this drill. Make sure that your mic is muted so that we don't have a lot of background noise. And you will be free to unmute if you need to bring up anything, but by keeping your mic off, it helps with clarity of sound. As far as video, we know that sometimes bandwidth is an issue and you need to turn your video off, and we understand that. But if you are able to show your video, it sure helps for presenters and for participants to be able to see the faces of those who are in the session. So we hope you will keep your video on if you are able to. Also, if you hover over your picture in the gallery view, you will see a couple blue boxes that pop up, and you have an option if you wanted to click on those three dots to rename yourself. Now, we don't want you to rename yourself like Cookie Monster or anything like that, but if you want to put your name and your affiliation in your to show up on your screen, then that helps people to make connections and to continue these powerful networks that we already have in place. So also, lastly, we are using the chat as the back channel for our day. We have folks who are helping us to monitor the chat, KVEC staff. We have Bernadette Carpenter and Kim Sargent. I know that our executive director and our associate directors are on, and they will help keep us in line and make sure that we are paying attention to what is going on in the chat box. So feel free to use the chat as a back channel. You will see different foundational links being shared throughout the session, things that we have gone back to as kind of foundational documents and frameworks and resources. And then we encourage you to share anything else that you would like to using the chat as a back channel. And I think that's everything for the logistics. And with that, I wanted just to make sure that everyone who is on the call is kind of familiar with the Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative, also known as KVEC. We were established in 1969. We are a non-regulatory service agency. So that basically means that the school districts and schools that work and partner with us do that because they want to. It's not by any kind of regulation. They choose to be members of our cooperative. We are now up to 20 5 school districts that are now members. Some of you who started working with us early on remember when we were at like 20 and 21, and we're now up to 25. We are a main provider of professional learning and educational services for our member districts, and our service area is now larger than the state of Connecticut as we are adding additional districts. So just wanted to make sure that you kind of knew who we were. We are, as I said, a main provider of professional learning for our districts, and we really see micro-credentials as one component of robust, high quality professional learning systems. So there's a lot of other types of professional learning that go on here at KVEC, networks being a prime example. We have a lot of networks of folks in role specific groups and content specific groups, and then even cross role groups to engage in cycles of continuous improvement. So that's just a little bit about us. The picture that you see, I have to tell you about this picture because as I was putting the slide together, I thought, oh, this would be a great picture to share, because this is actually a picture of one of the schools that we work with here at KVEC, in which the entire staff earned a micro-credential. They worked on a common micro-credential. This was their celebration dinner. It was everybody got a shirt that said increasing potential with micro-credentials. And we had, while the dinner was great fun, I think the great fun was really working together with this awesome staff to engage in professional learning. They learned a lot about micro-credentials, and I am happy to say that they are continuing to pursue micro-credentials as a format of professional learning within their school. So I wanted to share that with you all. And then I'm going to go ahead and talk to you a little bit about what we're here to talk about today. And I'm a terrible multitasker, so I'm trying to share my screen and look at my phone and make sure you see what you need to see. So, all right, there we go. I think we're ready to drive now. So a few months ago, we began some conversations with the Arkansas Department of Education about our learning and work with micro-credentials. We talked a little bit about how KVEC started with the work, how our micro-credential development work included training teachers and practitioners in the development and assessment of micro-credentials, how we work with those different roles in the micro-credential ecosystem, from developers to issuers to assessors to recognizers, and we had some really great conversations. Well, then that conversation with the Arkansas Department of Education led to a series of working sessions with a cross-agency team from their state department. Now, those of you who have been at the state level know that true collaborations across a state agency is powerful, and it's also hard to do. That is a kind of a rarity in state departments of education, to really have a true cross-agency collaboration. And rather than turning those sessions that we were engaged in with the Arkansas Department of Education into just information sharing sessions, we turned them into a true collaboration to work together to develop a cross-agency micro-credential and to plan for subsequent implementation, not only of that micro-credential, but Arkansas's work with micro-credentials as a format of clinical, competency-based, and personalized professional learning. We grounded this work in the document that you are looking at. And I know that this document is familiar to a lot of people. And I'm going to scroll down the end of the document and kind of show you that we have a lot of these folks who were listed here as contributors to this collective that worked on the design, assessment, and implementation principles for educator micro-credentials are on this call. So this group came together to work to identify what are those foundational elements, that common language around the development, the assessment, and the implementation of micro-credentials that will contribute to those being high quality professional learning. So our work with the Arkansas Department of Education was firmly grounded in these design, assessment, and implementation principles. You have a link to this document being shared in the chat box. So with that, kind of knowing a little bit about, so we started having these conversations. It led to some roll up your sleeves, really coaching sessions, work sessions with the cross agency team from Arkansas and folks from the Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative. Now, we know that you want to hear from them. You want to hear from those folks in Arkansas. So with that, I'm going to start with, we have some questions, but we really feel like this conversation may really become organic as we kind of go through our conversation, and we have folks sharing and learning from each other. So, but we're going to start with a question that I have, and that's just to get a little bit of background. You have the background from the KVEC perspective, but let's get the background from the Arkansas perspective. And I'm going to start with Bobette Ray, who was the first person that we really started having these collaborative conversations with from the Arkansas Department of Education, and ask her to talk a little bit about what prompted the Arkansas Department of Education to engage in this type of cross-agency professional learning about micro-credentials, because that staff was involved in learning themselves about micro-credentials, and then to engage the cross-agency team in the co-development of a micro-credential.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. I'm really excited to share our journey. Robert and Jennifer were extremely kind when I started this position to meet with me and give me background information about micro-credentials and kind of what Kentucky had done as far as policy and implementation. And so I realized that we were in some ways kind of at the same stage, only they had embarked on actually creating micro-credentials and had a lot going on. So my position was actually created around micro-credentials because Arkansas is really committed to looking at competency-based forms of professional development and giving teachers options. And so we have a career continuum, and all of the pathways to a lead or master designation on that continuum are based on some type of competency-based job embedded performance. And so micro-credentials, we have micro-credential stacks that lead to those designations. But we have a lot of state initiatives that we also feel micro-credentials are the perfect way to make sure that those initiatives are actually implemented in classrooms and impact students. So we started, I sent out a survey. I had lots of people approach me about their interest in micro-credentials and wondering when we were going to get started. And so I just kind of kept a running list. And then I sent out a survey to the different units in that agency to kind of gauge their interest and if they were ready to jump in and join this group. And some were and some were not, just because of timing. And so we got this group together, and actually, I'll be the first to admit that in some cases, I thought, now, how would they even consider a micro-credential based on their unit and the work they do? But as we came together and started to share, it was really obvious, oh, micro-credentials are the perfect form of learning for them as well. So that's really how we got to this place. We also had one of our units that had a grant, and they had written the creation of micro-credentials around high leverage practices into their grant work. So they were on a timeline with the grant. And so they invited me to be part of that implementation team. And so we started meeting, and that has been a really great collaboration. And so I'm going to let Becky talk a little bit about that.
And I will, before Becky gets started, I'm going to say that the team that came together was such a powerful team. I really enjoyed working with these folks and the different perspectives. And when you start to hear about their different roles within the agency, you will see what we mean about saying it truly was a cross-agency representation. So it was a perfect storm that came together in the Arkansas Department of Education for this work.
That's a great way of describing it. So I'm a coordinator with the Arkansas State Personnel Development Grant. This grant is a 5-year grant that's funded by the Office of Special Education Programs. As Bobette mentioned, our work is focused on supporting the expansion of Arkansas's statewide professional learning system through the development and the implementation of personalized competency-based micro-credentials. So the work with KVEC, it really provided our state team an avenue to increase and grow together. We engaged in a lot of cross-agency collaboration and a whole lot of productive struggle. Now, as a state agency, we have a common language and a deeper understanding of the design principles that will be used consistently. And this consistent use ensures coherence for the micro-credentials within the work of our grant, but also across our state.
Thank you so much, Becky. I was wondering how long it was going to take for productive struggle to come into the conversation. So I'm glad you went ahead and let that cat out of the bag. Oh, goodness. Well, I kind of want to hear if Daniel or Jeff will kind of chime in around this question too. They bring a unique perspective to this work, and they have been fun too.
Thank you. I'm Danny Muhlenberg. I'm a coordinator over at the Career and Technical Education. And this was, in the beginning, it was a very, it was an experience that I think struggle might be a very good word, but it has come together. And I look at it as a big puzzle with pieces all over that we had to kind of bring together. And seeing the picture and how this has come together right now has been pretty awesome. I know Jeff and I are very excited from the career and technical education standpoint, and trying to find our role and how this fits into the micro-credential was our struggle from the beginning. Although there is a lot of overlapping variables of competencies that between both agencies, there are some that are very unique within career and technical educations. Within that career and technical education in itself, we have 2 different types of licensures, just a licensure with endorsements, and then you have your industry personnel who come in right out of the industry into the classroom experience, who are basically technical permits, and trying to find an overlapping variable between just career and technical education that satisfies both of those components. What was it sure about it? It's starting to come together. And Jeff, if you want to elaborate.
Thanks, Danny. As Danny mentioned, we have both in our division, which is DCTE, Division of Career and Technical Education. We have traditional instructors who come from a 4-year training program, and we have permitted instructors who come from industry to teach skill-specific courses. And how did we fill the void between the division of those 2 skill sets? And working through this micro-credential process has allowed us to venture into an area that we didn't know we even needed to go to fill some of those voids. And we're very excited at the possibility of launching a couple of stacks of micro-credentials in the near future to fill various levels of those needs, and just stack those up and increase those teacher skills. And the fact that it is evidence-based procedure, that's going to help us tremendously in justifying that these teachers are doing what they need to be doing in the shop, and they have the understanding of, now I'm a teacher, not a shop professional. How do I move forward?
That's great perspective, Danny and Jeff. And when we talk a little bit more here, just a second, about the micro-credential that we have developed, then folks will really be able to see those entry points into that conversation that we had. So those were great perspectives. I'm wondering if anybody else from the team wants to share a little bit about kind of your perspective.
Jennifer, mine is weird, literacy.
Sandy, I wouldn't expect anything less.
That's exactly right. My job is the state reading initiative. Arkansas 4 years ago started a reading initiative, and we have 22 pathways for teachers to go through in a professional development system to reach part 1 of proficiency. And somebody, not me, put a link in there that says one of the pathways is a micro-credential. Well, I don't even know what that is when I started this training. So I'm like, okay, I need to go see what this is. I'm not sure it's actually going to work, because all the other pathways are like 36 hours of face-to-face training. So I'm not sure that's exactly the right label, whoever put that in there, but it's been eye-opening to see kind of what is a micro-credential and how does that fit in the giant scheme of literacy that we're trying to figure out how to manage across the state.
There was nothing weird about that. That was great.
Hey, Jennifer. Hey, I would like to share that for me, I work in a different division than most, and of course, it has been wonderful to work with other agencies or other departments here in the agency. And so for me, I'm an investigator. I'm an investigator with the Professional Licensure and Standards Board, and we look into allegations that are filed against educators. And so we mainly work for the Office of Educator Effectiveness under the PLSB. So, and in that, we decided that we wanted to create a process of, or create something that really helped with reflective processes with teachers so that they can work through those areas of professionalism and to maintain that level of professionalism and give them maybe some deeper knowledge where they can look at evidence-based practices in order to maintain professionalism within the classroom.
That is great. And I know Kim, I'm gonna wait just a second to hear from her because I'm gonna tag her in this next question and get her to kind of start us off with this, because what folks have alluded to in this conversation is the fact that the micro-credential that this team has come together to develop is, the title of it is Educator Self-Assessment and Professional Growth. And so you can kind of see the competency that's behind that is in how does a professional educator use evidence-based self-assessment to design a professional growth plan? How do they engage in that process? And knowing that we have educators that are coming to us now from lots of different pathways, how do we get them acclimated to their standards of professional practice or their frameworks of professional practice, engage in that self-assessment, using evidence, not just where I think I am, but what evidence and artifacts do I have to support that self-assessment? And then how do I engage in professional growth planning and professional improvement as a result of that? So that was the micro-credential. And I wanted to see if Kim will start us off talking a little bit about what was the conversations that we had, but then you all also had on the, on your own time as a team to decide that self-assessment would be this universal learning process that we would engage in for this journey.
Good afternoon, everybody. Well, so, as everybody has already kind of alluded, this cross-agency team came together, and of course we have certain things in common, but we had a lot of things, as I think Danny mentioned earlier, that are unique to each individual division or unit. So we were looking for something that applied to all of us because we all wanted everyone to have input into it. And so when you're thinking about self-assessment, that does apply to any job, but specifically in this work as educators. And so we brainstormed a lot of things, and then we had to just keep coming back and say, does this apply, to each one of us? And this was really important to us, is the self-assessment. We use the Danielson framework for teaching as our rubric for educator evaluations in the state. And so we thought, what a great way if we can really teach educators how to self-assess properly using that Danielson rubric, then we're much more likely, that's very intentional, and we're much more likely to get, those effective teachers and highly effective teachers because they're self-assessing and they know where they're strong and where they may need the work, instead of just kind of picking something out of the sky like sometimes teachers do. Because they don't know what else to pick. So it's just a great way to choose something that is going to be impactful. And as Jennifer mentioned, growth, we're looking for growth. And so it doesn't, a great teacher still has room for growth. And so this really fits all levels of teachers as well.
Thank you, Kim. Does anybody else from the team want to chime in? I don't want you all to think that we were putting up hands as we were trying to decide what we were going to develop this micro-credential around, because it was not like that. It was, we really just kind of landed there. But does anyone want to talk a little bit about your thought processes around this as our focus for our professional learning and the development of the micro-credential?
Jennifer,
I'll
Go
be
ahead,
fast, Jeff. I was going to say that I think that because we didn't come together with any preconceived ideas or topics, that we truly had to work from ground zero through the process of developing this micro-credential. And so one of the phrases that you used early on was that it's messy work. And it really, that became very evident as we started working together and wordsmithing and trying to, get just the right words to describe that competency so that it would be clear to educators what the expected outcome of the micro-credential would be. And so that was, I think a huge step forward for us as a group. So now we can take that knowledge back. And as Becky said, we'll have a common language. We've had this common experience. And so we'll have consistency as a state agency. Okay,
Thanks
Jeff.
a bit,
to you.
Jeff.
One of the things that we brought in from DCTE was trying to figure out how to keep this micro-credential that we were creating specific enough that it did some good for our educators, but yet it's generic enough that it fits in multiple disciplines and across the board. No matter what background the instructor has, they can still derive benefit from this micro-credential that we have picked to work on as a group. And I think that was one of the biggest things that I'm going to take away from this, is keeping them generic enough that they work across the board, but specific enough that they're of benefit.
I think that is great, Jeff. And we had the team had a lot of conversations about that, about how we define that competency so that it is a research-backed skill that educators need to engage in. And so I think that's a wonderful way to put it. And, again, going back to how timely is this as we think about teacher shortages and how we are better preparing teachers to have those professional practice skills and competencies, and then to build their capacity to engage in their own growth and effectiveness. So I think that's a great way to look at it.
We have a question in the chat from Kim Sargent, and her question is, how have teachers responded to this opportunity?
Jennifer, I can before you answer that question, because obviously we don't, in Arkansas, we're not quite sure how the teachers are going to respond yet because we've not put this into practice. But from an administrator's perspective, and in very large school districts, I wanted to go on what Jeff was saying, that for the micro-credentials, I see that it's a funneling of information into something specific. And I see that administrators try so hard to give support to a teacher in an area that may be very specific. And I'm not talking about incorporating a curriculum or, just classroom discipline, but more so a specific skill. And I think that when administrators go into those specific skills, they kind of just Pontius Pilate and wash their hands of it and hope to goodness, but that by the next evaluational process that it's fixed, and without providing that support. And then again, we also know that administrators and support specialists are very busy, and so this gives them the opportunity to where they can go in and work at a pace, and to be able to do like those self-assessments and have someone that's maybe objective to look at that and help them through the process.
I will just follow up and say that we have not had any educators do this micro-credential yet. We have a group that is very anxious to pilot this for us. But we have had educators do micro-credentials from outside providers. And so I have interviewed lots of those teachers, and the feedback is really positive for the most part. they enjoy that it's job embedded, that it's something real that they do in their classroom every day. So they see that relevance versus the traditional kinds of PD that they have attended, in their careers so far. So we're getting a lot of really good feedback. They like the idea that it's personalized and they can find something that is really applies to their educational setting and students.
Yes, I want to go, just ditto what Vicki and Bobette both said, is that we are just at a point right now where administrators need support in what are those professional learning resources that I utilize to help those personalized learning needs of my staff? And micro-credentials are a great way to get to that level of personalization, because you can have a cohort of teachers over here working on the self-assessment. You can have another cohort of teachers over here working on balanced assessment or working on instructional strategies. You can really personalize with micro-credentials. So I think that's a unique perspective to look at. And I think if we think about teachers responding to professional learning that is personalized to meet their individual learning needs, definitely has a much more palatable flavor than the one everybody sits in a chair and everybody gets a certificate for sitting in that chair. So I think you all have done a great job with that. So I'm going to let Robert take us into our next question.
Yep. Okay, so when you think about this journey and you're beginning any kind of process, I know when we started here in Kentucky looking at policy pieces in our Kentucky Department of Education, or Education Professional Standards Board, we're eager to speak with us. So we had some learning that we had to do with the policy implications, how this could fit in. They were talking with us. We were talking with other co-ops, other agencies, other folks with whom we were speaking across the nation, where they are with micro-credential development. So as we've developed our journey, there were always some deep learning or some ahas or something that happens, because sometimes when you start something new, there's trips, there's bloodletting, sometimes there's other things that occur as you're learning this new stuff. So could you talk to us a bit? What were some of your huge learnings of this process and your big ahas?
So I'll start. When we first started this process, you all asked us to rate ourselves on our current understanding of micro-credentials. And I rated myself somewhere in the middle, maybe a little bit higher, a lot higher than what I should have. My experience with micro-credentials at that time was as an earner and not a developer. And your mindset and the knowledge that we gained through developing one is completely different than being that earner. I think my greatest learning occurred when you all asked us to determine the competency and then to define it. So as Jeff said earlier, it's finding that sweet spot of generic enough, but still specific. This is that, determining that and defining it is the hardest step, but it's also the most important step. And so I struggled with that. And as a team, we spent a good amount of time trying to figure that out. I'll say one more. There were two questions that were posed to our team at the very beginning. And it was, one, how does the micro-credential improve professional practice? And two, how does it impact student achievement? And those two questions, every time we started working on them or in one of our coaching sessions, I continuously tried to refer back to those questions to make sure that the kind of learning that we would be offering through this micro-credential not only improved the practice, but also contributed to those better outcomes for students.
And Becky, you speak to the choir here, so that's the focus of all of it. So I thank you again for bringing that up. That's awesome. Sandy, yesterday we were talking and they said you're going to come in hot. So let's hear you come in hot on this one. What were some big ahas for you?
I said I was coming in hot because I had another meeting right before this. For me, of course, I came in, Becky came in mid-level knowledge. I came in at the dirt. I might have been under the dirt level knowledge. So I came in like zero, didn't know anything about it. I think for me, and I'm when I do professional development, which is what I do most of the time, if I have a 6-hour training, I might have 100 slides. I mean, I talk fast and furious and we get a lot crammed in. So for me, it was getting that, and Jennifer always says grain size, getting that down to the smallest piece without going so small that there's nothing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a balance that I struggled with. I'm still struggling with it because I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to make this connect. So I read in the paper that said substantive yet discrete, and that's really hard for me to do in my mind. So I think that was my biggest aha, was that it's not a great big amount of information that you're trying to throw together. It's narrow, but not so narrow that there's no substance.
Well, thank you. And that is true, because starting at the beginning and trying to get the right grain size, because if you make it too large, then you don't know what to do with the rest of it. It's like grabbing a bull by the whole bull instead of by the horns. So, Vicki, what was your take on this?
It was the same for us. It's just about for what I'm doing with the Professional Licensure and Standards Board, was just more about putting it all into one specific area. And we have 8 standards for the Code of Ethics for educators here in Arkansas. And, we have one standard that is very deep and wide and about professionalism with educators. And I think that this will give specific needs for teachers for professionalism. And whereas, our standard 8 is a black and white issue on using drugs and alcohol. So while that may not be as deep of a micro-credential as standard 2 might be. So there we might be able to develop a stack. So we kind of had an envisioning of creating the micro-credential, in that we can talk about what the Code of Ethics is, how it affects educators, and what they need to go through, and as far as, like I said at the beginning, the reflective practices, but then get deeper into each standard. And you hate to say that, will those be assigned as punitive parts of their practice? Maybe so. And in what we do as investigators, and when we look at licensure issues, it can also be used for that. So we have, as far as the needs-based approach, we have several ways that we can use the micro-credentials for our needs here at the Department of Ed.
And that's exciting when you learn that. As soon as you get through the process, you start connecting this together. So I thank you for that. That's very important. So Daniel and Jeff from the CTE, what was your big aha?
I've already kind of thrown my big aha out there this morning, was the generic but specific, but I'm going to defer to Danny, because Danny's aha that he came away from yesterday afternoon has inspired all of our morning's work this morning in the office.
All right.
And so I'm going to defer to him on this one.
All right. Looking forward to it, Dan.
Yeah, when I first got into this with the CTE and realizing that we have, as Jeff alluded to earlier, that we have the licensure aspect with people with the endorsements of people who've gone through the 4 years of training in the educational system, and then those who are coming right in from the industry with no pedagogy experience, et cetera. And that's my whole focus, was how do I sit back and develop the pedagogy? How can I get a teacher to self-evaluate themselves on the things that they're lacking in pedagogy and classroom management, on lesson plans, the student diversifications, realizing that it's not a one-size-fits-all type curriculum, that they have to kind of realize diversification among students, and how to keep students engaged in the classroom. How do I take an industry partner and bring them into the classroom, knowing that they've had no training on this, and be able to have them be effective and give keep the students engaged, et cetera. And from yesterday's meeting, the one variable which I was never concerned about was actually the industry experience. You figure somebody's coming in with all this industry experience, you don't have to worry about their knowledge to be able to teach. And then I started to realize is, how do you break down the components of what somebody has been doing for 20 some odd years naturally, of what they can do in their sleep? How can they sit back and simplify that means of context from a step-by-step process to break it down and minimize it into theory-based context of instruction? and realizing just as simple as what we look as walking, there is a component, numerous components that get broken down into the ability to walk. And when you look at somebody like from an auto, or from, I'm going to stick to my specialty, from sports medicine area, you look at somebody and you have all of this knowledge and skill set, you see somebody, you go through it, you treat them. But how do you teach that? What comes so natural to me, how do I break that down from step to step to step of something that I've been doing for 20 some odd years? How do I start? Do I start with, is it the safety? It's the identification of the situation. It's the mechanism of injury. It's the assessment and then the preparation and the planning stages. How do I form all that information of what comes so naturally to me into a building block of components for an actual lesson plan of instruction that's effective for our students to be able to learn? And that was, to me, is that area I was never concerned about until we started this whole process, and realizing the one thing I was so comfortable with was the one thing that I came about was my biggest concern, is realizing that I'm taking that part for granted.
Yeah. I really appreciate everything you just shared, because we've had that exact same conversation in this office. We've had this exact same conversation with others in other states around CTE and other fields about how we can make this work across. So your comments are taken to heart here. I know Danny works in our office. We've had this conversation often in his office. So you have summed that up, and I'm sure there were others who had the same feeling. And we'll talk to you more about that later as we get into our participation piece that's coming up very soon. So Kim, let's hear from you on this.
So I would say my biggest aha that I learned was that micro-credentials mean different things to different agencies or different organizations. There are different expectations and of what a micro-credential is. So it was really important to our group to come together, this cross-agency group, and say, look, here's what our expectations for a micro-credential are going to be. And, working with Robert and Jennifer and the KVEC group, they showed us an evidence-based template that was through CCSSO. So, that's top notch, that's vetted, about making sure that it's competency based. That was what was really important to us, because we have, now that we've dug in and looked at some micro-credentials from other places, as we were trying to, wrap our heads and get ideas, we see that some of them really, they're calling them micro-credentials, but they're really not competency based. And so we wanted basically a standard in Arkansas for, if it says micro-credential, then this is what it's going to mean. It's going to have all of these, components to them, and it's going to be competency based. And so I think that was really, my biggest takeaway is that when someone says micro-credentials across the nation, it doesn't, or even maybe, like I said, from organization to different agency, it doesn't necessarily mean the same thing. And so consistency within an agency or an organization is really important.
Yeah. And Kim, when we had conversations with our partners, when we were working on the design principles, that was a key component of that conversation around competency-based and commonality about what it means to have a micro-credential that's competency-based. And we even talked about, if I'm an employer and I want to know what that competency means, I want to see the exact discrete skills that this educator coming to my school for my students has. And so your point is right on target. So we appreciate that. I think we have a question that we need to ask here.
We do. And Kim, you were very intuitive, because you started answering the question that's in the chat box. So you're good. You're really good. So this is a question from Melissa Tooley with New America. And I'm gonna get down to the heart of the question there. And that says that some have critiqued our recommendations for using micro-credentials as being an unproven approach, and opined that it's unlikely that states can develop or select high quality micro-credentials given their track record for developing or selecting high quality PD. What would you all say in response to this argument? And I'm going to just put in a little plug here for something. I used to work in the State Department of Education, and my supervisor there, she taught me this little saying And I use it to this day. And I actually have it on a little in a little frame at my house, and it gives me great leverage sometimes when I need it. And her quote was, "You can't kook proof everything." And I know that doesn't sound like it's very like a biblical quote that you want hanging on your wall or anything, but it has helped me through some hard times. And I think it applies here. I think that the work that the Arkansas Department of Education is engaged in is high quality work, really focused on those standards of professional practice and designing high quality clinical professional learning activities that are part of a system of professional learning. Nowhere in our conversations with Arkansas have I heard them say, we are going to move to all micro-credentials for professional learning. They are identifying what are those skills and competencies that we need educators to develop and to have experiences clinically practicing them in their classroom. And we're going to design professional learning opportunities through micro-credentials to help educators to develop those. And through research that we have done here at the co-op and through even my own doctoral dissertation, we have found, and this is data that sometimes researchers don't want to hear about, but it's data, teacher perception of professional learning. And that was one of the things that I looked at. I looked at quantitative data, but I also looked at some qualitative data. Teachers who were engaged in micro-credentialing, how did they perceive that professional learning experience in terms of its alignment to Learning Forward's standards for professional learning? And the response, statistically significant, was that the earners, or those who were engaged in micro-credentialing, really felt like that professional learning experience aligned to those Learning Forward standards. This was high quality professional learning that had me looking at data, that had me working in collaboration and networks with other folks, that had communities of practice, that had a leadership component. They were all there. So while there may be examples, like Kim said, there may be things out there that people are calling micro-credentials that aren't. This group was very focused on what is a high quality micro-credential and how can we design that professional learning experience to get there. So I'm going to see if anyone wants to chime in on that question for Melissa. And she's also dropped a link to the report if that's something that you all are interested in reading about.
Can I just add one quick thing, Jennifer, which is just that we've heard critique in response to this report, specifically, even though we define what a high quality micro-credential is and is not in that report. And I think, using the same sort of design, implementation, and assessment principles and perhaps taking it even a step further. And I think there are just some folks that think that, moving from sort of this current system of teachers just selecting sort of like one-off professional learning is somehow, they don't think that's good either, right? It's not that they want to maintain the status quo, but they don't think that this is sort of the answer to it. And so I guess I'm just curious how you would respond to that, why? Yeah.
And I will say that here at KVEC and also in the conversations, and I'm going to let Bobette or someone there speak, but the systems that we're helping our districts create are not about teachers just shopping for micro-credentials. It's really about wrapping a system of supports around those teachers so that their professional learning is part of a system it hinges on that self-assessment. What are my professional learning needs based on the students that I'm serving in the school that I'm working in the community that I'm working in, and that there really is a level of personalization around that. And then it falls on the role of the leader to be able to effectively help that teacher select those professional learning experiences that do impact their professional practice. And here's the piece: impacts student outcomes. That's when a micro-credential is being effective, is when a teacher can show the evidence of advanced student outcomes as a result of that work. So I'm going to see if anybody from the Arkansas DOE wants to weigh in on that.
I would just say that I think part of the quality issue is tied to that assessment and feedback piece. You know, you really have to keep that bar high and make sure that all of your assessors are calibrated. So that's something that we're very aware of moving forward with this micro-credential. So we have some pieces in place to make sure that that happens. But also, you know, Sandy mentioned her professional development that she had put together and around the science of reading. And it's a great professional development. And I would never want to see those 6 days go away, because she has taken a really complex concept and broken it down into really digestible, understandable steps for teachers. I was a secondary educator, and now I can talk about how kids learn to read, which is an amazing feat if you knew how secondary I was. So, but the next step for that is, what am I going to do with that knowledge? And I think that that's where the micro-credential, it's going to ensure that implementation of a lot of our state initiatives. Because right now it's all on administrators, and we know that there's only one of them in a building with a lot of teachers. So the time spent in classrooms doing observations is limited. But if we can create something so we assess that evidence of implementation, then that's going to, you know, just ultimately make everything better for students. And so that would be kind of my argument to the benefit of micro-credentials.
Yeah,
Right, and
I think the systemic approach, I think that's key there. Vicki?
Right, and then there are some professional developments that we just don't provide, such as community outreach and communication with families and parents, especially. You know, we just at this point hiring ESOL teachers, or just hiring someone that can, you know, that can go in to speak of people instead of providing meaningful professional practices for areas of communicating with community members, or just parents in general, or even having discussing how to have a parent-teacher conference. So having a micro-credential and just a small stack of just, you know, community outreach and parent involvement is something that we don't teach for professional development.
Before Robert continues, I had put this in the chat box, and I see that there's a lot of folks that are doing this, that they're starting to chime in. If you have other ahas around just work with micro-credentials in general, or ways that they are more effective, those keys to those systemic approaches, you utilize that chat as the back channel. There's a lot of great information going in there, and the chat will be archived, so you will have access to it after after the session is over with.
So that's actually our next session for today, is to talk about ahas from those of you that are listening in. The chat box is really lighting up. So you'll see folks from different organizations talking about their work, of what they offer. Robert Hagerman has asked a question that if you can look at his response, has anyone used micro-credentials for alternative certification or pathways to licensure? So please drop those in the box. Any thoughts you have on that, or places that he could go. You're seeing folks talk about the importance of good professional development, and not being quick to think and have something to complain about, because often people complain about great PD. Maybe it's difficult PD, but it's still great PD. So I think we need to look at that. So when we look at our ahas from the participant view, and this is where I would hope some of you may have put this in the chat, but if you would unmute yourself and share that aha, and even interact with our Arkansas folks and have this conversation around this. I think this will make this deeper or richer. But then after you ask your question, if you could unmute to give other people a chance to talk as well. So anyone want to share their aha within this? Sue Beers, don't make me call you out.
I'm sorry, Robert. I was actually typing a response, so I'll even turn myself on here. Hopefully, with the camera, it's going to come on or not. So, would you ask the question again? Because
No, we were talking about the ahas, and you were dropping in the chat repeatedly some great things, and I think it's important that, because the chat box is filling up, so it's great to hear this. So I think if you could share some of the ahas and how they engage those questions with the Arkansas folks, that would be great.
Yeah, we're in about our 4th year with micro-credentials. I think we've developed about 80 of them. We've worked with our Iowa Department of Education to provide licensure renewal credit. We're still not on the pathways to certification. And so we found a way to make that work with our Iowa Department of Education. A biggest stumbling block, the biggest aha we've had, I think, is just the simple fact that when you have a choice, and personalized learning is certainly the route to go with learning as a professional, the issue sometimes is what we hear from people is this is a lot more work than just going to a workshop. I mean, I can go to a workshop and I can get a licensure renewal credit by sitting for 2 days and listening or whatever. Or even though I don't have to go somewhere or attend something for 2 days, it's a lot more work to put it into play, videotape it, document it, set it up and so on. And so while that hasn't kept a lot of people from using them, it's one of those things that until we kind of get to the point where we look at how we're providing licensure renewal credit, and do we have some easy pathways? Like anybody, we're going to take the easy path, right? Water flows to the easiest part. And that's where if we've had resistance at all. So one of the things we've tried to do is help people see how to use the micro-credential framework for purposes other than licensure renewal credit. So, or for some kind of professional development, for badge even. So our coaches and our principals use them to start to work with teachers in need of improvement or others, not for them to do the task, but there's questions to think about at the beginning. There's success criteria that's clearly outlined. There is a task they can give them, and there's a ton of resources already organized around a skill. So instead of using them just as a path to a badge or to licensure renewal or accreditation, we are having an increasingly number of our schools using them as tools and resources for organized, kind of individualized work along the way. So I think that's been an unexpected outcome of this as well. Sorry to take so long to answer.
No, that's fine.
And Sue, I want to say too, that picture that I showed at the beginning of that entire school that earned a micro-credential, that was key to their work, is that they engaged as a staff in analyzing their data. They looked at their school improvement plan. They looked at formative assessment data. They looked at all their pieces of data to identify what is an increased skill or competency that's going to give us leverage to move forward. And they selected a micro-credential around student engagement. And they worked together on that micro-credential during their professional learning community time. And the principal was right there as a part of that work. And I think that is what made that such a success, and is what kind of laid that foundation for their continued work around micro-credentials. And I think folks would be really hard pressed to find other models of professional learning that engage people in that level of deep learning, practical application of a skill or competency, collection of evidence, reflection on evidence, just all of those pieces that made it so powerful. So I'm glad you talked around that. That was wonderful.
There was another question. I'm sorry, go ahead.
System is important. So you can do I as a presenter, and I've been a literacy consultant for years. After a workshop, I always wondered how much of this is going to get to the classroom. How am I going to know that people are actually taking this information and using it and making it part of their everyday practice? And so I think that combining and looking at it as a system, and Robert and I have talked about this a lot in the past, having that system is so important, that when we do a conference or we do a sit and get workshop, we always combine it with a micro-credential that's the proof of the doing with it. In other words, you don't get a licensure renewal credit generally unless you do both. You can sit and get it, the knowing, but then you have to go do it to get the full credit. So anyway, I'll shut up. So.
No, thank you. The system approach, it's all part of a system. And again, just to reiterate with somebody, when we talk about micro-credentials, we don't talk about micro-credentials as being the answer. We talk about micro-credentials as being a part of the answer in a larger system. So thank you for bringing that back up. And we do have 2 comments. And I think I'm going to ask this now because it's reflective and it's aha. And it's a question that came from Kim Sargent, but Jason Lang also had put this in his comments, in his ahas. When you think about micro-credentials and you think about the aha, you think, well, we're going to need coaching within this. So what kind of thoughts or what kind of plans have you had for coaching teachers that are going through the micro-credential process? Any thoughts on that from the team?
I'll start off specifically with the grant work over the next 5 years. We have established partnerships with our regional service cooperatives as well as districts. Those cooperatives are going to assist us with our coaching. We will have internal coaching as well. So we have two thoughts for the coaching services. One, we have decided that we want to coach our regional specialists with how to provide ongoing assistance, high quality ongoing assistance and coaching for our educators. The educators will be going through our micro-credentials that are focused on implementing high leverage practices. So with the regional cooperative support, they will also be providing that high quality professional learning in-house, as well as the educators going through micro-credentials on high leverage practices and receiving coaching support. The administrators will also have gone through the micro-credentials so that they have the opportunity to grow their capacity with what those practices look like when implemented in a classroom.
All right. Thank you so much, Becky. Anyone else want to give their thoughts on this before we move to the next? So if you need to think about your response, you can always come back to it. I'm not going to this next question because when you take these ahas and what you've learned and you've created the self-assessment micro-credential, of course, the next thing to ask is, okay, so what? So what are your next steps? After you do final completion and you make this available, what's the Arkansas Department of Education's, what are your next steps here?
I was just typing, Robert, in the chat, but I'll back up to the support and coaching. You know, I mentioned the career continuum at the beginning of our conversation. All of those pathways are some type of competency-based demonstration of skill. So we would like to provide those teachers who have earned lead and master designations with some opportunities to become coaches and assessors for our micro-credentials as we move forward. So that is one way that we are planning to do that. And then just as far as next steps, specifically for this micro-credential, we're going to pilot it and then bring back those the evidence and artifacts and reconvene this team to calibrate and work on the assessment piece. And then depending on the level of interest, and I'll use popularity for this micro-credential, you know, we'll just build capacity as we go in around that. And so I have one more thought and it left me. So I'll stop and let someone else.
I often know when we were starting, and this comes from lots of things, but when you're starting anything new like micro-credentials and next steps, what I always found important, and I've shared this with others that are even on participants today, that a lot of times you have to go slow to go fast, and you have to start small to go big. So starting with a very methodical and thoughtful process before you begin micro-credential development, I think that would be important as one of your next steps. I think we even talked about that during one of our coaching sessions that we had with you guys.
And we
I would also.
Oh, go ahead, Becky.
Go ahead, Bobette.
No, you go.
Okay. And then we would also want to pilot the micro-credential to be able to get that feedback and be able to go in and make adjustments as needed.
We also have a communication plan. One of the things, the career continuum has been around for several years now. And I was on a call yesterday with some administrators and I asked how many of you knew that we had a career continuum. And I think one administrator raised his hand. So, you know, there's just, we think that the word gets out and that we're communicating, but it's really hard. So I think that, so we have, we're working with our communications on some micro-credential Mondays that will be rolling out eventually.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
And then I think just communication within our agency. I think one of my big takeaways from this process and assembling this group is just how little we communicate as an agency with each other. We typically are very siloed. And so I think that this has been a great opportunity. I've made new friends that I would not have had without this experience. And so I'm just looking forward to that continued work. We certainly don't see this micro-credential completion as the end of our journey, but the beginning.
No, that's like location, location, location. When it comes to this, communication, 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 that's key. Not just at the state level, but how it trickles down to the districts, how it trickles down to the teachers, how it trickles down to the students, and just makes that system work. So Bobette, you are right on point when you come to that communication piece. So
Can I add something to that
yes,
communication
please do,
piece,
Kim.
Robert?
Yes, Kim.
So one of the things I was thinking about as we start to really roll this out and change conversations at the schools and districts around communication is a couple of things that Sue touched on earlier, was teachers saying, well, this is a lot more work, but what we need them to know is, sit and get is not the only option. And there are times for sit and get, but with this, it's more about meeting specific needs. So the communication to administrators, these are great things that they can attach to their professional growth plans, to support those. And with teachers having some choice in that, we've all, as educators, over the years have sat in professional development that was blanket professional development that you didn't think it applied to you. And, so there was teacher perception like, why am I here? I don't know why I have to listen to this. And with this, that teachers can choose the things that are meaningful, that are actually going to make change and impact their instruction and student outcomes. And all of this also follows like the Joyce and Showers research, that if you just go sit and sit and just get a whole bunch of information on a PD day, the likelihood that you're only going to put in 5% of implementation of 5% of what you heard, unless there's continued follow-up and assessment and reflection and coaching and all of those things. And that's what this, micro-credentials lend in that way, because you're self-assessing, you're checking to see how you're doing, and people are giving you feedback. And so you're just going to get so much more out of a micro-credential in those cases.
Thank you, Kim, for that. And that is important, that it is meaningful and it's just in time, and it pertains to what I need for my students. In the sake of time, because we're running close on short of time now. And so, but this has been an awesome conversation. And I do hope you are looking into the chats and reading the comments from that are sent to everyone, because there's some very impactful statements and impactful thoughts in there. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer, who's going to lead us into our next question for our panel.
Well, thank you, Robert. And we've already started to answer this question. This group is they're on their A game. They're kind of getting ahead of us and answering questions before we ever get to them. But we've talked about what other topics that you guys are considering for micro-credentials or other clinical competency-based professional learning, maybe not necessarily a micro-credential. So we've heard you talk about the high leverage practices. We've heard you talk about the code of ethics. We've heard you talk about the science of reading. Are there other topics that you all have kind of in the queue for the consideration of further micro-credential development?
I'll go.
Take one for the team, Sandy. Thank you.
All right. We have 2 state laws. My first question is, why would anybody take a micro-credential? Because there's PD everywhere, right? And so why would you do that? And so there's 2 state laws that we balance a lot through the literacy department. One of them says every year a district has to provide PD in the science of reading. There's no rules and regs. It can be an hour. It doesn't say anything about it. The other law is that you will test every single student K2 for indicators of dyslexia. So those two things wadded up together could make a stack of micro-credentials. So because teachers get very confused about the difference between all the different kinds of assessments that we ask. So I was thinking this morning we could create one that was just about the screeners. It talks about, pull in the evidence base behind it, talk about different pieces, show how, and then the actual piece that they actually create would be them actually giving the assessment and then having the data to prove it. That would be a win-win for the teachers and the districts and the students at the end. And I think doable through a micro-credential.
Yeah, and I appreciate that too, because what you're talking about is breaking this up into smaller grain size so that you're not having an educator taking weeks to go through something. You can get this done in a short amount of time and do that in discrete skills so that it is able to be completed within small amounts of time and then move on to the next component. So I appreciate what you just said.
Okay. Any other kind of ideas that you all have around further development, or if you want to speak to some of the ones that we've talked about maybe a little more in depth?
I'll just kind of throw out there that we've been in talks with Bloom Board around an equity micro-credential, around culturally responsive teaching, just like that kind of overarching thought process.
All right. Thank you very much. And those are much needed areas of professional learning. So probably the big question that that all of you all can speak to is this process of the development and the implementation, all of those things that we've talked about around implementation, about how do we support schools and districts in this work? How do we provide them models of what implementing micro-credentials would look like? How do we do these things? So how do you see the development and implementation of micro-credentials, including the one that you all have developed, changing conversations at your state agency, within your districts, and within your schools?
Jennifer, just for me, it goes back to in everything that we do, the reflective practices. I think that we don't ask our students for reflective practices, and we don't ask that enough of our teachers. And so I think that one common thing embedded in those micro-credentials will get the conversations going outside of just attending a professional development, but talking about them in specifics.
That is great. And then I like the fact that Sue has posted that they would like to start working on micro-credentials around culturally responsive schools and practices. That is just such a timely topic. And I'm just going to throw something out there. It would be lovely to see some sort of national collective come together to develop micro-credentials around that topic. And then we would like to see our policymakers question the quality and the validity of micro-credentials as they're developed by so many people who really working to make our schools more culturally responsive for our kids. I would love to see something like that take place.
And the retention of those teachers too, Jennifer, retention of those teachers and those that go through that, because we provide those important micro-credentials. At some point, we've got to be able to retain those teachers that we're investing in.
Okay.
I would also say that with the geography of Arkansas, the opportunity for an educator to utilize a micro-credential, it's going to play a role in ensuring that they have the equity and accessibility to that high quality professional learning that maybe they wouldn't just because of where they live and the distance that they would have to travel.
Thank you, Becky. That's probably why we have all gotten along so well, is we really do share that common dilemma around rural students of poverty and the geography issue about how remote some of our schools and districts are, and the fact that it is such a barrier for them to be able to they have no, but we're in our third, fourth biennium of $0 for professional learning in our school budgets. So they don't have the money to pay registration fees, let alone substitute fees and travel fees and all those things that go along with it. But then again, to travel for 2 days for a 6-hour sit and get workshop, at the end of the day, all we have is a certificate that says they did a really good job of sitting in the chair. So, maybe that this is a much better alternative to some of those professional learning experiences. Does anyone else want to talk a little bit about the way that you see some changing conversations happening as a result of this work?
Arkansas is in the process of revising professional development rules for the state. And so one of the things is, really encouraging districts to award PD credit for micro-credentials and other forms of the demonstration in the classroom. We get really hung up on time and measuring things in hours. And I've had several administrators already contact me and say, well, how much PD credit do I give for a micro-credential? So we really are going to have to shift our thinking and just get out of that time-bound mindset and think of some ways that we can make that work. But I think that our new professional development rules will support the use of micro-credentials a lot more than our 36 hours that we
Wouldn't you
have.
love to get your hands on the person who decided to make time the currency for learning? I would really like to get them. So. So with that, Robert, I think we have one more question that we want to put out there.
Yeah, so we've had some great thoughts in the chat. We've talked about grain size, we've talked about competency base, we've talked about the importance of making it meaningful to me. When you look at the higher ed, I think Rocky Wallace put something out there about how competency base is moving its way. It's important that's part of university coursework, and the MCs are a way to go there. So we appreciate hearing from the universities on that end. So within the last few minutes that we have together, and thinking about the journey. So our Arkansas folks, they had used micro-credentials before with some of their work. Some of them have completed micro-credentials, but yet they all had their learning moments. Like, oh, here's something we didn't even know. So before we close out for today, and you think about others who may be listening in or other folks, and you go through this journey, kind of think about what would be one or two major considerations that you would suggest folks to think about as they move forward or continue down the road of micro-credential development. And I'm going to start with Vicki on this one.
I always say, and I've heard Jennifer and you say it a million times, it's how is it going to affect student outcomes? What is it going to do to be better for our students? That's my major takeaway on it, is that I don't see that whenever you look at you make anything grain size and you study that and reflect upon it, I don't see how you could ever go wrong with keeping students in mind during that process.
Thank you, Vicki.
I would suggest taking the time to really thoughtfully select your team members, identifying those that represent various divisions or units across your agency or organization. And of course, don't stay siloed. This process is stronger with collaboration. Each person on our team provided different viewpoints and they brought in different strengths. So now our team has ownership of the work, and this ownership is really key as we begin to think about expanding and scaling up the use of micro-credentials.
And I'm just going to chime here, Becky. We talk about last week and today, the partnerships and possibilities. When you have that collaboration that's occurring across agencies, states, across schools, I mean, everything becomes stronger and it's better for the students. So thank you for bringing that up. Bobette, did you have something you had to add to this?
I think I would just like to say that it's been a great experience. I would highly recommend it to any group that is interested in truly pursuing micro-credentials as alternative to traditional professional development. And like I said, I've met and made relationships now, and I think we see how our work complements each other as a state agency and how we can move forward and support each other.
And thank you for that. And I'm going to close this out by saying, and I hope many of you use the chat, either through private chats to get to connect to each other. And I hope you're sharing email addresses so you can continue this, guys, because I think this is a conversation. And in all 5 of our summits, the partnerships and the conversations, I mean, we couldn't have had our Digital Agile podcast we've had it not been for those partnerships. I wouldn't have known Ann Kaufman personally, but it's been wonderful to have those conversations, or all the folks on this panel with Arkansas and our other good friends at Digital Promise, Bloomboard, Iowa, etc. So if you want to drop or your email, just like Sue did within the chat, feel free to do that. Feel free to share during in the last moments of the chat. But we want to thank all of you for participating today, because this is a conversation that keeps getting richer and getting deeper. We're seeing more policy changes. As Melissa pointed out, there are more reports coming out. There's more research being developed around micro-credentials, because often you hear, well, what's the research behind it? Well, the research behind education is new. What's happening in other fields is not new. So micro-credentialing has been happening in other places for years. It's newer to education. But after 5 or 6 years of this, it's not so new anymore. We're seeing direct impact on the impact of the positive impacts this could have on students. We will be, for all those who are attending, who have registered, we will be putting out the links to the session 1 and session 2. Feel free to use these as often you need. And if you have any other questions or comments, Jennifer and I, and Jennifer, you have that page. Jennifer and I will be ready to answer questions or to help you connect with other folks. But again, thank you much. And thank you for all those who came on today. And we look forward to having continued conversations in the future. And hopefully we can see you again next year.